The gavel fell like thunder in the mahogany courtroom, and my husband's voice cut through the silence with surgical precision. "She's just a housewife, Your Honor. She knows nothing about running a business." 23 years of marriage collapsed into those 6 words. I sat perfectly still in the defendant's chair, my hands folded in my lap, watching the man I'd built an empire with dismiss me as if I were invisible furniture. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his confident face as he gestured toward our company's financial records. "Mrs. Patterson has no formal business education," his lawyer continued, shuffling through papers with practiced indifference. "She's never held an executive position. The restaurant chain was built entirely through Mr. Patterson's vision and expertise." I felt the weight of every eye in that courtroom: the judge, the stenographer, the handful of observers who'd come to witness our divorce proceedings. My throat tightened, but I refused to speak. Not yet. The mahogany walls seemed to close in around me, trapping the echo of his words in the stifling air. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses, studying the documents before her. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that had seen countless broken marriages dissolve into bitter financial disputes. "Mr. Patterson, you're requesting full ownership of Patterson's family restaurants based on your wife's alleged lack of contribution to the business." "That's correct, Your Honor." David's voice carried the same tone he'd used when explaining wine pairings to customers in our first restaurant 30 years ago: confident, authoritative, dismissive of anyone who might disagree. "The business requires someone with actual experience in corporate management." I watched him straighten his tie, the same navy silk one I'd given him for our anniversary last year. His wedding ring caught the light as he gestured, and I wondered when he'd decided I was worth nothing. When had I become just a housewife in his eyes? When had my contributions become invisible? The courtroom felt like a cathedral of judgment, all dark wood and whispered conversations. I could hear the scratch of the stenographer's fingers on her machine, recording every word that would determine my future. My lawyer, Miss Chen, sat beside me with a stack of papers that seemed pitifully small compared to David's legal arsenal. "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Morrison's voice drew me from my thoughts. "Do you have anything to say regarding these claims?" I looked up at her, this woman who held my life in her hands, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger, something quieter, more dangerous. "No, Your Honor, not at this time." David's lawyer smirked, clearly interpreting my silence as surrender. They had no idea what I'd been doing during those long, quiet months since David had served me with divorce papers. While he'd been celebrating his victory with his secretary-turned-girlfriend, I'd been remembering things, important things. The judge made a note, her pen scratching against paper like claws on glass. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for final arguments." As the courtroom began to empty, David approached me with the swagger of a man who believed he'd already won. "Sarah, this doesn't have to be ugly. You'll get the house and a reasonable settlement. You can live comfortably." I stood slowly, gathering my purse with deliberate care. When I finally looked at him, I saw a stranger wearing my husband's face. "Just a housewife," I repeated softly, tasting the words like poison. He had the grace to look uncomfortable for a moment. "You know what I meant." But I didn't respond. I walked past him, past his lawyer, past the scattered remnants of our life together, and stepped into the courthouse hallway where the afternoon light streamed through tall windows. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor, each step carrying me further from the woman who'd sat silently while her husband erased her existence. Tomorrow I would speak. The rain began as I drove home, fat droplets splashing against the windshield like tears I refused to shed. My hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled determination as David's words echoed in the hollow space of my car. "Just a housewife." The phrase had lodged itself in my chest like a splinter, sharp and persistent. I pulled into the driveway of the house we'd bought together 15 years ago, the house where I'd hosted dinner parties for potential investors, where I'd spent countless nights reviewing restaurant proposals while David slept. The garden I'd planted still bloomed despite my neglect these past months, roses climbing the trellis with stubborn beauty. Inside, The silence felt different than it had during the separation. It wasn't the hollow quiet of abandonment anymore. It was the stillness before a storm. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and stared at the phone, knowing I should call someone, my sister, my friend Margaret, anyone who might offer comfort. Instead, I walked to the window and watched a rain streak down the glass. The house held our history in every corner. The kitchen where we'd planned our first restaurant over coffee and dreams. The living room where we'd celebrated our first million in revenue. The study where I'd balanced books and managed suppliers while David charmed investors and food critics. But according to him, I'd been invisible through it all. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and opened the closet. Behind my dresses, in a showbox that had once held my wedding shoes, lay the documents I'd been collecting for months. Bank statements, incorporation papers, supplier contracts, all bearing my signature alongside David's. All proof of a partnership he'd apparently forgotten. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof with increasing intensity. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a faded copy of our original business license. Patterson's Family Restaurants. It read, incorporated by David Patterson and Sarah Patterson, equal partners, equal dreamers, equal builders of something beautiful. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Hope you're okay. This will all work out. As if I were a child who needed reassurance after a difficult day at school. As if 23 years of marriage and business partnership could be dismissed with platitudes. I didn't respond. Instead, I went to the kitchen and made tea. The same chamomile blend I'd served to nervous investors in the early days when we couldn't afford an office and conducted meetings around our dining room table. The familiar ritual calmed my hands but did nothing for the storm building in my chest. The phone rang at 8 o'clock. Margaret's voice was warm with concern. Sarah, honey, how did it go today? He called me just a housewife. The words came out flat, emotionless. That bastard. Margaret's anger was immediate and fierce. After everything you've done, you practically built that business from scratch, did I? The question surprised me. Had I convinced myself of my own irrelevance over the years? Had I let David's growing confidence overshadow my own contributions? Sarah Elizabeth Patterson, don't you dare let him rewrite history. I remember when you two started with that tiny calf. You were there for every decision, every late night, every crisis. After she hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the rain and remembering. The night we'd almost lost everything when our head chef quit without notice, and I'd stepped into the kitchen myself, cooking for 50 customers with nothing but determination and a prayer. The morning I'd negotiated our first major supplier contract, saving us 30% on costs. The afternoon I'd designed the layout for our flagship restaurant, sketching plans on napkins until David's architect could formalize them. Just a housewife. I walked to the study and turned on David's computer. The password was still our anniversary date. A bitter irony. His email was full of correspondence about the divorce, strategies for minimizing my settlement, discussions about my limited involvement in business operations. But there, buried in his sent folder, was something that made my breath catch. An email to his lawyer from 6 months ago. Sarah's been asking too many questions about the books. We need to move quickly on the divorce before she digs deeper. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a crystalline silence that seemed to amplify the beating of my heart. I printed the email, my hand steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. David hadn't just dismissed me, he'd feared me, enough to orchestrate this entire proceeding around keeping me away from information he didn't want me to find. I spent the rest of the night in the study, following digital breadcrumbs through years of financial records. What I found in the pre-dawn hours would change everything. But for now, I simply sat in the darkness, holding the printed email, and smiled for the first time in months. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The courthouse steps were slick with morning dew as I climbed them at 8:30, 30 minutes before our scheduled hearing. I carried a leather briefcase I hadn't used in years, the one David had given me when we incorporated the business. For my partner, he'd written on the card. The irony wasn't lost on me now. Miss Chen met me in the hallway, her expression cautious. Sarah, I have to ask, are you certain about this approach? We could still negotiate a reasonable settlement. I looked through the tall windows at the city beyond, at the skyline that included 3 buildings where our restaurants operated. I'm certain. Inside the courtroom, David sat with his legal team, confident and relaxed. He'd worn his lucky suit charcoal gray with thin pinstripes, the same one he'd worn to our first major investor meeting. When he saw me, he offered a patronizing smile, the kind reserved for difficult children who'd finally accepted their punishment. Judge Morrison entered precisely at 9, her black robes flowing like storm clouds. Good morning. We're here for final arguments in Patterson versus Patterson. Mr. Patterson, you may begin. David's lawyer stood, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. Your Honor, the facts are simple. Mr. Patterson built this restaurant empire through his vision, his connections, and his business acumen. Mrs. Patterson, while a devoted wife, lacks the experience and education necessary to manage a multi-million-dollar corporation. I watched David nod along, his face the picture of reasonable concern. He'd practiced this expression, I realized. The reluctant husband forced to speak hard truths about his well-meaning but incompetent wife. The financial records clearly show that all major business decisions, all investor relations, all strategic planning originated with Mr. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson's role, while appreciated, was essentially that of a supportive spouse. Judge Morrison made notes, her pen scratching against paper like accusations. When David's lawyer finished, she turned to Miss Chen. Counselor, Miss Chen stood, but before she could speak, I rose beside her. Your Honor, may I address the court directly? A flicker of surprise crossed Judge Morrison's face. David's confident expression faltered for the first time. Mrs. Patterson, while unusual, you may speak. I walked to the center of the courtroom, my heels clicking against the marble floor with measured precision. The briefcase felt weightless in my hand, filled as it was with 23 years of truth. Your Honor, my husband is correct about one thing. I am just a housewife. I paused, letting the words settle like dust in sunlight. I'm the housewife who incorporated Patterson's family restaurants in 1999. I'm the housewife who secured our first business loan when the bank initially refused to consider my husband's application. I opened the briefcase and withdrew a stack of documents. I'm the housewife whose signature appears on every major contract, every lease agreement, every supplier negotiation for the past 24 years. David's lawyer leaned forward, whispering urgently in his client's ear. David's face had gone pale, his confident smile replaced by something approaching panic. I'm the housewife who designed the operational systems that allowed us to expand from 1 cafe to 12 restaurants. I'm the housewife who negotiated the acquisition of our 3 largest competitors. I placed a document on the judge's desk. This is the incorporation filing, Your Honor. You'll notice that Patterson's Family Restaurants was established as a 50-50 partnership between David Patterson and Sarah Patterson. Judge Morrison examined the document, her eyebrows rising slightly. Continue, Mrs. Patterson. I'm also the housewife who discovered last night that my husband has been systematically transferring company assets to offshore accounts for the past 18 months. I placed another document before her. These are bank records showing transfers totaling $2.3 million to accounts in the Cayman Islands. The courtroom erupted in whispers. David shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is sit down, Mr. Patterson. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the noise like a blade. She studied the bank records, her expression growing darker with each page. I continued, my voice steady as morning rain. I'm the housewife who spent 6 months quietly documenting these transfers, working with forensic accountants to trace every hidden asset. I'm the housewife who discovered that my husband planned this divorce not because our marriage failed, but because I was asking questions about discrepancies in our books. I placed the final document on her desk, David's printed email to his lawyer. I'm the housewife who found this email, sent 6 months ago, in which my husband instructs his attorney to move quickly on the divorce before Sarah digs deeper. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. David sat frozen, his lucky suit suddenly looking like a costume that no longer fit. His lawyer frantically shuffled through papers, searching for a response that didn't exist. Judge Morrison read the email twice, her lips pressed into a thin line. When she looked up, her eyes found David's. Mr. Patterson, these are very serious allegations. Do you have an explanation for these transfers? David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The man who'd built his reputation on smooth words and easy charm had nothing to say. "I'm just a housewife, Your Honor," I said softly. "But I'm a housewife who remembers everything." Judge Morrison set down the documents with deliberate care, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom like a closing door. Her eyes moved from David to me, then back to the evidence spread before her. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to age everyone in the room by years. "Mr. Patterson," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years on the bench, "I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you have an explanation for these offshore transfers?" David's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but David himself seemed to have shrunk inside his expensive suit. The confident businessman who'd dismissed me as irrelevant just 24 hours ago now looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. "Your Honor, these transfers were for legitimate business purposes. International expansion, market research." His voice trailed off as he realized how hollow the words sounded. I remained standing in the center of the courtroom, my hands steady despite the earthquake of vindication happening inside my chest. "Your Honor, if I may present additional evidence?" Judge Morrison nodded, and I withdrew another folder from my briefcase. "These are communications between my husband and his business partner, Marcus Webb, discussing the establishment of a competing restaurant chain using assets hidden from our joint business." The papers rustled as I placed them before the judge. David's face went from pale to gray, the color of old concrete. His lawyer looked like a man who'd just realized he'd been defending the wrong case entirely. "The plan was elegant in its simplicity," I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "Divorce the housewife, claim she contributed nothing to the business, award her a minimal settlement, then launch a new venture with the hidden assets. My husband would emerge as the sole genius behind Patterson's success, free to build an empire without the burden of an equal partner." Judge Morrison studied the communications, her expression growing more severe with each page. "Mrs. Patterson, how long have you been aware of these activities?" "6 months, Your Honor. Since the night I found discrepancies in our quarterly reports, and my husband told me not to worry about business matters that were too complicated for me to understand." I smiled, a small, sad expression that held 23 years of accumulated dismissals. "That was the night I remembered that I have a master's degree in accounting from Northwestern University." A collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom. David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with something approaching terror. Even his lawyer looked stunned. "I earned that degree while working full-time to support my husband through business school," I continued. "I've been the silent partner in our accounting firm's success, the invisible hand that balanced books and managed cash flow while David played the role of visionary entrepreneur." Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair, processing the magnitude of what she was hearing. "Mr. Patterson, did you know about your wife's educational background?" David's mouth moved soundlessly for several seconds before he managed to whisper, "Yes, and yet you testified yesterday that she lacked the qualifications to manage a business." The question hung in the air like an accusation. David's lawyer placed a restraining hand on his client's arm, but it was too late. The truth had momentum now, rolling forward with unstoppable force. "Your Honor," I said quietly, "I have one final piece of evidence." I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a thick folder, its contents representing months of careful investigation. "These are the original business plans for Patterson's family restaurants, written in my handwriting. The financial projections, the market analysis, the operational frameworks, all created by the housewife who apparently contributed nothing to our success." I placed a folder before Judge Morrison, then stepped back. "I wrote those plans in 1999, sitting at our kitchen table while my husband was at his day job. I researched locations, negotiated our first lease, designed our menu pricing structure. I was never just a housewife, Your Honor. I was an equal partner who chose to let her husband take credit because I believed in our marriage more than I believed in my own recognition." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the tick of the wall clock, marking seconds that felt like hours. David sat slumped in his chair, the fight gone out of him completely. His lawyer shuffled papers with the desperate energy of a man trying to build a defense from nothing. Judge Morrison closed the folder and looked directly at me. Mrs. Patterson, in light of this evidence, what are you requesting from this court? I had prepared for this moment, rehearsed it in my mind during countless sleepless nights. But standing there, facing the woman who would determine my future, I felt a calm settle over me like morning mist. I want what was always mine, Your Honor. 50% ownership of Patterson's family restaurants, full disclosure of all hidden assets, and the return of every dollar that was transferred without my knowledge or consent. I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the space between us. And I want the record to reflect that I was never just a housewife. I was a partner who trusted the wrong person. Judge Morrison nodded slowly, her decision already forming behind her measured expression. Court will recess for 30 minutes while I review all evidence presented. As the courtroom emptied, I remained standing in the same spot, watching David gather his papers with shaking hands. He looked up at me once, his eyes holding a question he didn't dare ask aloud. But I had no comfort to offer him, no forgiveness for the years of diminishment and the months of betrayal. I was no longer just a housewife. I was a woman who had finally remembered her own worth. The 30 minutes stretched like hours. I sat in the courthouse hallway, watching lawyers and litigants hurry past with their own urgent dramas. Miss Chen sat beside me, occasionally glancing at her watch, but I felt oddly peaceful. The storm that had been building inside me for months had finally broken, leaving behind a strange clarity. Sarah, Miss Chen said quietly, I have to ask, why didn't you tell me about your degree? About the business plans? I watched a young couple walk past, holding hands despite the tension in their faces, probably here for their own divorce proceedings, because I'd almost convinced myself it didn't matter. 23 years of being told your contributions are secondary. It changes how you see yourself. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Morrison's expression was unreadable. David sat rigidly upright, his lawyer whispering final strategies that sounded increasingly desperate. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany walls. After careful review of all evidence presented, Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying the authority of absolute judgment. This court finds that Mrs. Sarah Patterson has been the victim of systematic financial fraud and deliberate misrepresentation. David's sharp intake of breath was audible across the silent courtroom. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Patterson was not only an equal partner in the establishment and operation of Patterson's family restaurants, but that she was instrumental in its success through her financial expertise, operational planning, and business development efforts. Judge Morrison lifted the business plans I'd submitted. Their pages yellowed with age, but their significance undeniable. These documents, written entirely in Mrs. Patterson's hand, constitute the foundational blueprint for what became a 12-restaurant empire. The court finds Mr. Patterson's characterization of his wife as just a housewife to be not only inaccurate but deliberately misleading. I felt something shift inside my chest, not vindication, exactly, but recognition. After decades of invisibility, I was finally being seen. Regarding the offshore transfers totaling $3 million, this court finds that Mr. Patterson engaged in willful concealment of marital assets with the intent to defraud his spouse. These actions constitute both civil fraud and potential criminal activity. David's lawyer stood shakily. Your Honor, if we could discuss a settlement, sit down, counselor. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the attempted interruption like steel. This court's decision is as follows. Mrs. Sarah Patterson is awarded 60% ownership of Patterson's family restaurants, reflecting both her foundational contributions and the punitive damages resulting from her husband's fraudulent concealment of assets. 60%. More than I'd asked for. More than I'd dared hope for. All offshore accounts are to be immediately frozen, and their contents returned to the marital estate. Mr. David Patterson will surrender all corporate passwords, access codes, and financial documentation to Mrs. Patterson's representatives within 48 hours. The gavel fell with finality, but Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential criminal charges related to the fraudulent transfer of assets. David's face had gone completely white. His lawyer gathered papers with trembling hands, already calculating the damage to his own reputation. But I felt only a deep, settling calm, like dust after a storm. "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Morrison said, her tone softening slightly, "I want you to know that in 30 years on this bench, I've rarely seen such a clear case of a partner's contributions being systematically erased and undervalued. Your patience and thoroughness in documenting the truth likely saved not only your financial future but prevented a significant miscarriage of justice." I stood slowly, my legs unsteady after hours of tension. "Thank you, Your Honor." As the courtroom began to empty, David approached me one final time. His confident swagger was gone, replaced by the uncertain gait of a man who'd lost everything he thought he'd cleverly secured. "Sarah, I never meant for it to go this far. We can work something out, can't we? For old time's sake?" I really looked at him for the first time in years. The man I'd loved, built a life with, trusted completely. The man who'd been willing to destroy me to protect his own interests. "David," I said quietly, "you spent months planning to erase me from our shared history. You called me just a housewife in front of a judge, knowing it was a lie. You transferred millions of dollars to hide them from me, then acted like I was too stupid to notice." He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm not hurt. I'm just done." I picked up my briefcase, the same one he'd given me decades ago when we were partners in every sense of the word. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers about the transition of corporate control." I walked toward the courthouse doors, my heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of a woman who finally knew her own worth. Behind me, I could hear David calling my name, his voice echoing in the vast space like a prayer that would never be answered. The afternoon sun was brilliant after the fluorescent harshness of the courtroom. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply for the first time in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "How did it go?" I smiled as I typed my response. "I'm not just a housewife anymore. I'm the majority owner of Patterson's family restaurants." The future stretched before me like an open road, full of possibilities I'd forgotten existed. I was 62 years old, newly divorced, and finally, completely myself. It was the most beautiful feeling in the world. 6 months after the courthouse victory, I stood in the executive office that had once been David's domain, watching the morning sun paint golden rectangles across the mahogany desk. The nameplate now read Sarah Patterson, CEO. But the weight of those words still felt foreign on my tongue. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the bustling street below, where people hurried to jobs that defined them in ways I was only beginning to understand. The transition hadn't been seamless. 3 of our 12 restaurant managers had quit within the first month, unable to accept orders from the woman they'd dismissed as David's wife for over 2 decades. The remaining staff watched me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, waiting to see if the quiet woman who'd once arranged flowers in the lobby could actually run an empire. My assistant, Jennifer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who'd worked for the company for 5 years, knocked softly on the door. "Mrs. Patterson? The quarterly reports are ready for your review." I'd asked her to call me Sarah dozens of times, but she seemed more comfortable with the formality. Perhaps we all needed time to adjust to the new hierarchy. "Thank you, Jennifer." "And the meeting with the investors?" "Scheduled for 2 o'clock. They're curious about the leadership change." Her diplomatic phrasing couldn't hide the truth. The investors were nervous about entrusting their money to a woman who'd been invisible to them for decades. After she left, I opened the quarterly reports, my train eye immediately catching the patterns that others might miss. Revenue was down 8% from the previous quarter, not catastrophic, but concerning. The downtown location was struggling, and our newest restaurant in the suburbs was hemorrhaging money. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Lunch today? I want to hear about your new life as a corporate mogul." I smiled, typing back, "Can't. Saving an empire." But the truth was more complicated. I wasn't just saving a business. I was learning to inhabit a version of myself that had been buried for decades. The woman who'd written business plans at her kitchen table was still there, but she'd been dormant so long that awakening her felt like learning to walk again. At noon, I drove to our flagship restaurant, The one David and I had opened 22 years ago in a converted Victorian house downtown. The lunch crowd was smaller than usual, and I noticed several empty tables that should have been filled. Maria, our head server, approached with the cautious smile she'd worn since the ownership change. "Mrs. Patterson, it's good to see you. How are things, Maria?" "Really?" She glanced around nervously before answering. "Some of the regular customers have been asking about Mr. David. They seem confused about the changes." I nodded, understanding the subtext. David had been the public face of Patterson's for decades, charming investors and customers with his easy confidence. I'd been the invisible partner, the woman who smiled politely at company parties but never spoke about business strategy. "What would you tell them if they asked?" Maria considered this carefully. "I'd tell them that you've always been here, taking care of things. Maybe they just never noticed." Her words stayed with me as I returned to the office for the investor meeting. 5 men in expensive suits sat around the conference table, their expressions ranging from polite skepticism to barely concealed condescension. I recognized the look. It was the same one David's lawyer had worn in court, the assumption that I was playing dress-up in a world too complex for my understanding. "Gentlemen," I began, setting my laptop on the table with deliberate precision. "Thank you for coming. I know you have concerns about the recent changes in leadership." Richard Blackwood, our largest investor, leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been questioned. "Sarah, we've known you for years, of course. Lovely woman, wonderful hostess. But running a restaurant empire requires a certain expertise." The familiar dismissal washed over me like cold water, but this time it didn't penetrate. I'd heard these words before, in different forms, from different men. The difference was that now I had the power to respond. "You're absolutely right, Richard. It does require expertise." I opened my laptop and projected a detailed financial analysis onto the wall screen. "For instance, it requires the expertise to notice that our food costs have increased by 12% over the past 18 months while our menu prices have remained static." The room grew quiet as the numbers filled the screen, each data point representing hours of analysis I'd conducted over the past month. "It requires the expertise to identify that our downtown location is failing not because of market conditions, but because we're paying 30% above market rate for our lease, a lease that was renewed without proper negotiation 2 years ago." I clicked to the next slide, showing comparative market analysis. "And it requires the expertise to recognize that our suburban location is struggling because the demographic analysis was flawed from the beginning. We're serving upscale cuisine to a family-oriented community that wants casual dining." Richard's confident expression had shifted to something approaching attention. The other investors leaned forward, studying the data with the intensity of men who'd suddenly realized they might have underestimated their audience. "These problems are fixable," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I've already renegotiated our downtown lease, saving us $40,000 annually. I'm restructuring the suburban menu to better serve our actual customer base. And I've identified 3 new locations that match our demographic profile perfectly." I closed the laptop and looked directly at Richard. "The question isn't whether I have the expertise to run this company. The question is whether you're prepared to support the changes necessary to make it profitable again." The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Richard cleared his throat. "These are impressive insights, Sarah. We'd like to see your implementation timeline." After they left, I sat alone in the conference room, watching the afternoon light fade through the windows. Jennifer appeared in the doorway with a cup of tea, her expression carefully neutral. "How did it go?" "They're going to support the restructuring plan." I accepted the tea gratefully, inhaling the familiar chamomile scent. "But they're still waiting for me to fail, and if you don't..." I smiled, thinking of David's confident dismissal in the courtroom, of 23 years of being seen as decoration rather than partner. "Then they'll have to admit they were wrong about what a housewife can accomplish." That evening, I worked late in the office, reviewing supplier contracts and planning the menu restructuring. The building was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. This was my domain now, this world of spreadsheets and strategic decisions that I'd helped build but never been credited for creating. My phone rang at 9 o'clock. David's name appeared on the screen. The first time he'd called since the divorce was finalized. I stared at it for several rings before answering. "Hello, David." "Sarah." His voice sounded tired, older somehow. "I heard about the investor meeting. Richard called me." I waited, offering no response to fill the uncomfortable silence. "He said you presented some impressive analysis, solutions to problems I hadn't noticed, problems I'd been trying to discuss with you for months before you filed for divorce." Another pause. I know I made mistakes. Big ones. You made choices, David. There's a difference. The restaurants are struggling without me. You know that, right? Revenue is down. Staff morale is. The restaurants are struggling because of decisions you made before you left. I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. Decisions I'm now fixing. Revenue will recover once the restructuring is complete. And if it doesn't, I looked out at the city lights, at the empire we'd built together that was now mine to save or lose. Then I'll deal with that too. Just like I've been dealing with everything else while you were planning your exit strategy. After he hung up, I returned to my work, but his words lingered. The restaurants were struggling, and despite my confident presentation to the investors, the path forward was uncertain. I was 62 years old, learning to be a CEO while fighting the perception that I was simply keeping David's seat warm until a more qualified replacement could be found. But as I reviewed the financial projections one more time, I felt the same quiet determination that had carried me through months of investigation and courtroom testimony. I hadn't fought this hard to reclaim my worth just to surrender it to doubt. I was no longer just a housewife, and I was no longer just David's partner. I was Sarah Patterson, CEO, and I had work to do. 18 months later, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of our newest restaurant location, watching the construction crew put finishing touches on what would become Patterson's 13th establishment. The space buzzed with purposeful energy workers installing custom lighting, designers arranging furniture, my operations manager conducting final inspections with military precision. "Mrs. Patterson?" Jennifer's voice drew me from my observations. She no longer hesitated when addressing me, and the formality had evolved into something that felt like respect rather than uncertainty. "The food critics from Metropolitan Magazine have arrived for the preview tasting." I smoothed my navy blazer, not David's choice this time, but mine, and walked toward the dining room where 3 of the city's most influential food writers sat at our signature table. These were the same critics who'd praised David's vision for decades while I'd remained invisible in the background, ensuring the vision became reality. "Miss Patterson," the lead critic, Jonathan Hayes, rose as I approached. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have stood for me. The shift in his demeanor marked something larger, a recognition that had been earned through results rather than charm. "Jonathan, thank you for coming. I hope you're enjoying the preview menu. Exceptional, as always. But I have to ask, this new direction, the focus on locally sourced ingredients and community partnerships, whose vision is this?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. For decades, I would have deflected, given David credit for ideas that had originated in my notebooks. But those days were finished. "Mine," I said simply. "The community partnership model reflects my belief that restaurants should serve their neighborhoods, not just extract profit from them." Hayes made notes, his expression thoughtful. "The financial press has been following Patterson's recovery closely. Revenue up 37%, 3 new locations, and now this innovative community model. How do you respond to critics who say you're simply benefiting from David's groundwork?" I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the old instinct to minimize my contributions. But then I thought of the quarterly reports showing consistent growth, of the staff meetings where ideas flowed freely for the first time in years, of the community leaders who'd partnered with us because they trusted my vision. "David built a successful restaurant chain," I said carefully. "I'm building something different, a community-focused hospitality group that happens to serve exceptional food. The foundation was solid, but the direction is entirely new." After the critics left, I walked through the kitchen, observing the controlled chaos of prep work. Our head chef, Carmen, looked up from her station with the easy smile that had become common since the management changes. "How did it go with the critics?" "They seemed impressed. But more importantly, how do you feel about tomorrow's opening?" Carmen's smile widened. "Ready. The staff is excited. They feel like they're part of something meaningful now, not just serving expensive food to people who can afford it. That evening, I returned to my office to find an unexpected visitor waiting in the reception area. David sat in one of the leather chairs, looking older than his 60 for years. His once confident posture had been replaced by something more tentative, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the weight he'd lost. "Hello, Sarah." I studied him for a moment, this man who'd shared my life for over 2 decades. "David, this is unexpected. I wanted to see the new location before it opens, if that's appropriate." I led him through the restaurant, watching his reaction to the changes. The space was warmer than our traditional locations, with local artwork on the walls and community bulletin boards near the entrance. The kitchen was visible through large windows, creating transparency that our older restaurants lacked. "It's different," he said finally. "Yes, it is. The community partnership model, whose idea was that?" I turned to face him fully. "Mine. Based on research I conducted about sustainable hospitality practices and community engagement." He nodded slowly, as if processing information that didn't fit his understanding of who I was. "The financial reports show remarkable growth. Richard Blackwood says you've exceeded every projection." "We have. I never knew you had these ideas, these capabilities." The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. I felt no satisfaction in his recognition, no vindication in his surprise, only a deep sadness for the partnership that could have been. "I always had them, David. You just never asked." We walked in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. "I've been thinking about what I said in court, about you being just a housewife. And I was protecting myself. I knew you were capable of more than I'd given you credit for. I was afraid that if you realized your own worth, you'd leave me behind." I stopped walking, studying his face in the soft lighting of the dining room. "So you decided to leave me behind first?" "Yes." The word came out like a confession. "And I was wrong about everything." My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Saw the preview coverage in the evening news. You looked like a CEO who owns the world." I smiled, typing back, "Getting there." When I looked up, David was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're happy," he said, and it sounded like a question. "I'm myself," I replied. "For the first time in decades, I'm completely myself. I'm glad." I know that probably sounds hollow, but I am glad. After he left, I stood alone in the restaurant that would open its doors tomorrow, surrounded by the physical manifestation of ideas that had lived in my head for years. The community bulletin boards, the open kitchen, the locally sourced menu, all reflections of a vision that had been dismissed as impractical when I'd suggested similar changes years ago. My phone rang, and Jennifer's voice was excited. "Sarah, you need to see the evening news coverage of the preview. They're calling it revolutionary and the future of community dining." I walked to the bar area and turned on the television, watching as the food critic described our innovative approach to hospitality. The camera panned across the dining room, capturing the warmth and openness that had been my goal from the beginning. In an industry often criticized for prioritizing profit over community, the reporter said, "Patterson's new model suggests that successful business and social responsibility can coexist." CEO Sarah Patterson has transformed what was once a traditional restaurant chain into something entirely new. I turned off the television and stood in the quiet space, feeling the weight of tomorrow's opening and all the tomorrows that would follow. The woman who'd been dismissed as just a housewife had built something that critics were calling revolutionary. The irony wasn't lost on me, but more than vindication, I felt possibility. This restaurant was just the beginning of proof of concept for ideas that could reshape how we thought about hospitality, community, and business success. I was 63 years old, and I was just getting started. The future stretched before me like an unwritten menu, full of flavors I'd never tasted and experiences I'd never imagined. For the first time in my adult life, I was the author of my own story, and it was going to be extraordinary. 2 years had passed since that first community restaurant opened, and now I stood in the boardroom of Patterson Hospitality Group. The company had evolved beyond restaurants into something larger, something that reflected the vision I'd carried silently for decades. Through the windows, I could see the city skyline where 5 of our community-focused establishments now operated, each one a testament to the power of listening to neighborhoods rather than imposing upon them. The mahogany table was surrounded by faces that would have been unimaginable in David's era: community leaders, social entrepreneurs, local farmers, and yes, traditional investors who'd learned to see profit in purpose. Today's meeting would determine whether we expanded nationally or remained a regional model. The Portland proposal is ambitious, said Elena Rodriguez, our newest board member and a nationally recognized expert in sustainable business practices. 15 locations over 3 years, each one designed around specific neighborhood needs. The financial projections are strong, but the social impact metrics are what make this truly revolutionary. I nodded, studying the presentation that represented months of research and planning. The question isn't whether we can replicate our model, it's whether we should. Growth for its own sake was David's philosophy. I'm more interested in growth that serves a purpose. Richard Blackwood, the investor who'd once questioned my capabilities, leaned forward with the intensity of a man who'd learned to trust my judgment. Sarah, the numbers don't lie. We're seeing 30% higher customer loyalty, 25% better staff retention, and profit margins that exceed industry standards. This model works. It works here, I corrected. In communities we understand, with partners we've built relationships with over years. Portland is different. The Pacific Northwest has its own culture, its own needs. Jennifer entered quietly, placing a folder before me. The Portland community leaders are here for the video conference. I opened the folder, reviewing the profiles of the 5 neighborhood representatives we'd been working with for 6 months. Unlike David's expansion strategy, which had focused on demographics and foot traffic, our approach began with community engagement. We didn't enter a neighborhood. We were invited in. The video screen flickered to life, revealing faces that had become familiar through months of virtual meetings. Maria Santos, a community organizer from Southeast Portland. James Chen, who ran a local farmers cooperative. Sarah Blackhorse, a tribal council member working on indigenous food sovereignty. Each of them represented not just a neighborhood, but a vision of what hospitality could become. Good afternoon, everyone, I began. Before we discuss expansion timelines, I want to hear your honest assessment. Are your communities ready for this partnership? Maria spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades fighting for her neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson, I'll be direct. We've seen plenty of restaurants come and go, promising community engagement while extracting profit. What makes you different? The question cut to the heart of everything I'd been building. What makes us different is that we don't see community engagement as marketing, we see it as the foundation of sustainable business. Our success depends on your success. James Chen nodded thoughtfully. The employment model you've proposed, hiring locally, training for advancement, profit sharing with community organizations, it's unlike anything we've seen, because it's based on a simple principle, I replied. Restaurants don't exist in isolation. They're part of an ecosystem. When that ecosystem thrives, everyone benefits. After the call ended, the boardroom fell silent. Elena was the first to speak. They trust you, Sarah. That's not something you can manufacture or buy. Trust is earned through consistency, I said. David built restaurants. I'm building relationships. Richard cleared his throat, his expression serious. There's something else we need to discuss. I received a call yesterday from David's attorney. The room grew tense. David had largely disappeared from public view after the divorce, though rumors occasionally surfaced about failed business ventures and mounting legal troubles related to the offshore accounts. He's requesting a meeting. Says he has a proposition that could benefit both of you. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the old anxiety that David's presence had always triggered. But it passed quickly, replaced by something steadier. What kind of proposition? He wouldn't say. Only that he has information about Patterson Hospitality Group that you'd want to hear. Elena frowned. That sounds like a threat or desperation, I said quietly. Either way, I'll meet with him. But here in this office, with witnesses present. That evening, I stayed late in the office, reviewing the Portland expansion plans while waiting for David's arrival. The building was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic. Through my window, I could see the lights of our flagship restaurant, where the dinner service was in full swing. Jennifer had left hours ago, but she'd arranged for building security to escort David to my office. At 8 o'clock precisely, there was a knock on my door. He entered looking smaller than I remembered, his once commanding presence diminished by circumstances I could only guess at. His suit was expensive but ill-fitting, and there was a desperation in his eyes that made me feel unexpectedly sad. "Hello, Sarah. Thank you for seeing me, David." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, maintaining the physical barrier between us. "Richard said you had information to share." He sat heavily, his hands fidgeting with a folder he'd brought. "I've been following Patterson Hospitality Group's success. The community model, the expansion plans, it's impressive work." "Thank you. I also know you're considering national expansion. Portland, Seattle, Austin, ambitious markets with significant competition." I waited, offering no response to encourage or discourage him. "There are people, investors, competitors who aren't happy about your success. They see your model as a threat to traditional hospitality industry practices." And he opened his folder, revealing documents I couldn't see clearly from across the desk. "Marcus Webb, my former business partner, he's been building a coalition of restaurant groups to undermine your expansion efforts, spreading rumors about financial instability, questioning your business model's sustainability." I felt a flash of the old anger, but it was distant now, like thunder from a storm that had already passed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I owe you more than I can ever repay. And because—" He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "Because what you've built is remarkable, and it deserves to succeed." He slid the folder across the desk. Inside were emails, financial documents, and meeting notes detailing a coordinated effort to sabotage our Portland expansion. The evidence was damning and thorough. "How did you get these?" "Marcus thought I'd want to join his campaign against you." He was wrong. David's voice carried a weight of regret that seemed to age him before my eyes. "I may have destroyed our marriage and lost everything I'd built, but I won't be part of destroying what you've created." I studied the documents, my mind already calculating responses and protective measures. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing." The word came out quickly, as if he'd anticipated the question. "I don't want money, or recognition, or a place in your company. I just want to know that I did one thing right." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 25 years of shared history settling between us like dust in abandoned rooms. "David," I said finally, "I appreciate this information. It will help us prepare for challenges we might not have seen coming." "Good." He stood slowly, looking older than his 66 years. "For what it's worth, Sarah, I always knew you were capable of this. I was just too afraid to admit it." After he left, I sat alone with the documents, processing both the threat they revealed and the unexpected gift of David's warning. The man who'd once tried to erase me from our shared history had now given me the tools to protect what I'd built from his erasure. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Dinner tomorrow. I want to hear about the Portland plans." I typed back, "Dinner sounds perfect. I have stories to tell." Outside my window, the city hummed with the energy of millions of lives intersecting in ways both visible and hidden. Somewhere in that maze of light and shadow, Marcus Webb was planning my downfall. But I was no longer the woman who could be dismissed as just a housewife. I was Sarah Patterson, CEO of Patterson Hospitality Group, and I had work to do. The battle for the future of community-centered business was just beginning, and I intended to win it.